Hi, this is Politics by Jake, and this is the Sunday show. And let me begin, okay, by saying something plainly. Because the language itself has been deliberately broken, and if we don't fix the language, we can't fix the thinking. And it is that I intend to springboard off of for today's topic. And the word is conspiracies. I do not use that word except in a negative way, except pejoratively. In modern discourse, conspiracy has become a conversation stopper. It no longer means an agreement to commit wrongdoing. It no longer refers to coordination, to planning, to shared intent. It no longer has the reference to exalting oneself above one's fellows at their expense. It now means something uncomfortable that someone wants to dismiss without engaging very much. And that's a problem because history does not move by rumor, it does not move by vibes, it does not move by YouTube thumbnails or Instagram charts. History moves when people with aligned interests coordinate quietly, deliberately, and with incentives properly aligned. Conspiracies, on the other hand, and I hope I'm not offending any of you religious people out there, I don't mean to. Let me say that. So keep that in mind as I say what I'm about to say. Conspiracies, to me, they're more like that thing that Jesus said in the Gospel of John, chapter 3, you know? The one about the Holy Ghost being like the wind. Everybody born of the Spirit is like the wind. What did he say? He said, you can't tell where the wind comes from, and you can't tell where it goes. I think they're like that. And another good example is to call them by that old saw phrase, will o' the wisp. And that's in itself has become kind of a vague phrase. You say will o' the wisp, the people of today, especially the younger ones anyway, the millenarians, the Gen X's, the Gen Z's, they're not necessarily, unless they're particularly, well, not particularly, but a little more well read than the average bear, they're not going to know what that means. So let me explain that to you. Talk about language. A will o' the wisp is this: it's a mysterious light, originally, a mysterious light seen at night in swamps or marshes. It's something elusive or misleading. That's a secondary definition. And another good definition of that is a false hope that draws you off course. In modern usage, it means a tempting but unattainable goal. Something, that flickers ahead of you, but it vanishes when you approach it. If you want to use it politically, or I guess economically, or personally, it's a mirage. It's like a mirage on the horizon. The old Romans called it ignis fatuus, which to them, the translate, that's foolish fire. Ignis fatuus. Shakespeare's era actually loved imagery like this: fleeting lights, phantom promises, things that shimmer but cannot be grasped. And by the 19th century, it firmly meant basically a deceptive hope leads nowhere. So, why is this a powerful phrase? I still like it. I am not a Gen X, a Gen Z, or a millenarian, but I still like it. I still think it's a powerful phrase. I still think it ought to have purchase in society and in the English language because it's not just illusion, it's worse than that. An illusion, an illusion just sits there. A will o' the wisp, that moves. The phantom light that moves away from you the closer you get to it, it moves, it leads you, it suggests motion, pursuit, energy, with a particular consideration about wasted energy. That's why it's so evocative in political or philosophical language. It implies a false salvation, a manufactured hope, a glittering lie that drains the pursuer. You chase it. The more you chase it, the more it recedes. Then you chase it more, then it recedes more. Then you chase harder. Finally, you get into the swamp where it is and you begin to sink. And at a certain point, if you're smart, you'll say, I can't work with that. And that's what I say. Conspiracies are will-o'-the-wisp. I can't work with that. That's why there's the legal maxim that extraordinary claims, you've heard me say this before, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And in the absence of such evidence, these claims can and should be quickly, summarily, and without further ado, dismissed. So I'm not going to use the word conspiracy. And I don't ever, except, like I said, negatively, pejoratively, use the word conspiracy. Instead, I always use not a word, but a phrase. And I think it's a sharper term. And the phrase I use is secret combination. Not fantasies, not mythology, not demons, not bloodlines, not ancient cults, not swamp gas, like mysterious nights or noises in the night. A secret combination is what happens when people coordinate privately to protect their own power, their own wealth, or insulate themselves from consequences, and to do so in a way that is not visible to the public, but is very visible to people inside the system, and which also frequently is designed and calculated, whether purposely or whether it just happens, to elevate those people above, as it were, other people at those people's expense. Private this, secret that, private island, you're hearing with the Epstein files recently. This is not exotic. This is not fringe. This is not new. And these kinds of things have been around for a long time. And Rome understood this better than we do, I think. And I'm going to give you an example of that. And, it's something that every third-year Latin student, except if it wasn't for the fact that they don't teach Latin in secondary schools anymore, it's about that. It's about Lucius Sergius Catiline, who he was, what he did. And we're going to get to that in the next segment, but we'll take a break, and then we'll be right back. And this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. All right, thank you, Twain Consulting. This is Politics by Jake, and we're back. And as I said in the previous segment, now, in order to give you an idea of what I talk about, I broached the idea, the concept, the phrase secret combinations. I told a little bit about what it was. And now I'm going to give you an example of that. And as I said, every third-year Latin student, except for the fact that they don't teach Latin in the secondary schools anymore. But let's put it this way, every person who studies Latin eventually runs into Cicero. And Cicero was considered a father of his country. Cicero was of the late Republic. He was actually quite an interesting person. I don't know whether you would want to call him a polymath, but he was notable in Rome at the time for several things. He was a lawyer, he was a senator, he had imperium, he fought battles for Rome, he led armies, he was a great orator and a great writer. And he existed and worked and operated at the time of the very late Republic when there was awful strife going on. And he ran up against a colleague named Lucius Sergius Catiline, or Catilina. And we call him, in English, we call him Catiline. And I'm going to tell you about that now. I'm going to talk to you about that. Who was Lucius Sergius Catilina, or Catiline? He was a Roman aristocrat. He was born into an old but declining patrician family. And, if I may say, those people, and you go on Instagram and I suppose TikTok and other social media, and you have people talking about these old patrician families, the black families, the secret families who control the world. If you do the research on a lot of these, not a lot of them, but some of them don't even exist anymore. And so when you go, word to the wise, when you go on Instagram, do your research because a lot of these allegations that you will see, some of the families, they literally don't exist anymore, or they've maybe been absorbed by marriage or something like that. But he was kind of like that. Catiline was a Roman aristocrat. He was born into an old but declining patrician family. He was definitely ambitious. He was definitely charismatic. And he was deeply in debt. And this actually was not unusual for an office seeker. The cursus honorum, which is the road of honor that patricians and even novi homines, new men, even they wrote it. It almost required you to go into debt. There was one office in the cursus honorum, which was the office of aedile. And the aedile was responsible for things like the grain dole, public entertainments, things like that. And you almost had it was hard to avoid going into debt for stuff like that. So he was deeply in debt. Julius Caesar at one time was deeply in debt. Not that unusual, but okay, he was deeply in debt. But he was the other things too. He was ambitious. He was charismatic. He was a Roman aristocrat. He was born into an old but declining patrician family. And he wanted the consulship, which was Rome's highest elected office. And he wanted it badly. So he ran and he lost. And then he ran again. And he lost again, more than once. And Catiline, he did not take losing well. No, no, no. So what led to the secret combination? Because this is an example of it. This is what we're talking. This is the reason why I'm talking about this guy, because this is a secret combination. It's an example. So in the late Roman Republic, and this would be the 60s BC, I talk about 1930s Germany, Nazi Germany. This would be the 60s, late Roman Republic. And among other things that could be said, you have this. You have massive wealth inequality, much like now. You have veterans without land. You have nobles drowning in debt. Political corruption was everywhere, everywhere. And you have factional warfare between the two groups. There were two political groups, just like, there were Republicans and Democrats. There were two political groups. The Democrats, I think, would be the populares, the populars, and that would be the party of the people. And then you had the optimates, or as it would, if you're in Rome, you would say the optimates. And the optimates, they were all the patricians. They were the high-ranking people. The populares was more the people's party. And you had thugs, and you had fighting in the streets, and you had gangs, and really quite something. Rome was tearing itself apart. Catiline positioned himself as the champion of debt cancellation, redistribution of land, for the veterans, relief for the dispossessed. But here's the edge. Many of his supporters, they weren't idealists. It's like the supporters of Trump. They're actually more dangerous than Donald Trump because Donald Trump is a doofus and he is a useful tool for the people who are behind him. In this case, the people who were his supporters were bankrupt aristocrats like himself, ruined men, opportunists. So when he launched the consulship again in 63 BC, and this time to Marcus Tullius Cicero, and that's the guy that we were talking about, third year Latin. Cicero is Marcus Tullius Cicero. He allegedly shifted from political maneuvering into conspiracy. So, okay, what was this about? The Catilinarian conspiracy of 63 BC was, in essence, a plan to overthrow the Roman government, assassinate key officials, cancel debts, seize power, and Cicero exposed it in the Senate. And he did it in his famous Catilinarian orations. And I wish this was taught in secondary schools. I really do. And by teachers. And more than teachers, but true magisters. And once again, I'm betraying my knowledge of magister as a teacher. Magister in Latin, that's a teacher. But magister is more like a master, someone who's a master of knowledge, as they would be called in Latin, who knew and taught the significance and importance of why their students needed to study Catiline. And honestly, I think I studied Catiline. I think I did third year Latin I think I was in the 11th grade. And in the 11th grade, I was thinking about sports. I was thinking about girls. And, from this perch where I am sitting right now in my life, I wish my magister had taught me better, but he was a good magister. And I'm not even sure I would have listened or thought it was serious because I would thought if that happened to Rome, that would never happen. And one of the famous phrases that Cicero uses in the Latin, quousque tandem abutere Catilina patientia nostra. How long, O Catiline, will you abuse our patience? And there was a series of these orations in the Senate against Catiline, and very eloquent, and I translated them all. Catiline fled Rome as a consequence of this, and he attempted an armed rebellion in Etruria, and he was killed in battle in 62 BC, and, basically that was the end of him. And at this point, let's take time for another break and break the station and get a couple of advertisements on the air. And this is Politics by Jake, but we'll be back with this. Very interesting. Stay with us, okay? Stay tuned. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. All right, so we were talking about the Catilinarian conspiracy. He fled Rome. He was killed in battle in 62 BC. Magnificent orations against him in the Senate by Marcus Tullius Cicero. What's the core meaning of all this? Let's strip it down, shall we? you have a frustrated elite politician leveraging economic despair, organizing a covert power grab under a banner of reform. That's the skeleton. Was he a villain? Was he a proto-revolutionary? Was he merely a desperate aristocrat? Well, historians debate this, but, plainly what it was it was a conspiracy born of ambition, debt, factional rage, and a collapsing Republican order. And now, here's something that you hear often amongst the unwashed who do not have the benefit of this training. Honestly, if you go by this standard, we're not properly educated. And it doesn't matter how much else they were taught. They could, in other aspects, be educated just fine. But if they weren't educated in this, because this is the basis of it, if you're not educated to understand the political situation, the governmental situation, and understand the value of it, there's a hole in your education. So if you go by this standard, that is this. When Catiline attempted to overthrow the Roman Republic, he didn't do it through superstition or mysticism. He did it through debt relief promises. He did it by exercising or utilizing elite resentment, because there are a lot of elites like him who are drowning in debt. He did it through recruitment. He did it in coordination. He circulated letters. He tested loyalty. He assumed secrecy within a constrained audience. He didn't get up on the rostra or the rostrum and didn't go to the Roman mob and say, hey, wake up. This is what's happening. This is not what he did. He went to people who could act. And when Cicero exposed the plot, the Senate didn't say, well, we can't really be sure yet. They didn't wait for ultimate certainty. They didn't demand metaphysical proof. They didn't take it to a court and have a formal finding of fact and conclusions of law. They assessed risk. They looked at incentives. They used reason. And that distinction, the distinction between ultimate proof, and ultimate proof is seductive. A lot of people will say, where's your proof? Where's your evidence? The distinction between ultimate proof and reasonable inference is the foundation of everything we're talking about now, because we've trained ourselves basically into a trap. We've convinced ourselves that unless we have absolute metaphysical certainty, unless we have a confession, a verdict, a signed document, or history's final judgment published in the textbooks, we must say nothing, and we are authorized to say nothing, except to be like opinions. And you know what they say, opinions are like elbows, everybody has at least two. We must do nothing. We are hamstrung. Our mouths are clamped shut. We must suspend judgment entirely. That standard is impossible. It's not workable. You can't have a situation that's like that if you're going to use something in order to get to truth. Ultimate facts. Have you ever gone into Black's Law Dictionary and looked up? Go there and look up the definition of a fact. There's like 30 different kinds of facts. Ultimate facts are one of them. Ultimate facts often take decades, sometimes centuries. Sometimes they never arrive in a form that feels emotionally satisfying. And power knows this. Power relies on this. Delay is not neutral. Uncertainty, on the other hand, is often engineered. I mean, if Rome had waited for ultimate facts, the Republic collapses. If prosecutors waited for ultimate facts, organized crime never gets touched. If intelligence agencies waited for ultimate facts, prevention would be impossible. So it kind of behooves us that we must separate two standards that modern discourse can constantly confuse. Proof governs punishment. Reason governs conduct. And today, we're not talking about punishment. Today, we're talking about reason. Reason is crucial. Plato said, that Socrates said, and of course, Whatever else you might want to say about Plato, you can say that he was the scribe of Socrates because Socrates never wrote anything down. Plato was one of his students. And we can strongly infer, that the things that Plato wrote were things that he heard Socrates say. So we're talking about reason. And Plato said that reason was the highest of all of the human rational options. There's reason, logic is below it, and then there's, opinions, which, like, opinions are like elbows, everybody has too. Reason is not speculation. Reason is not paranoia. Reason is not filling the gaps with fantasy. No. Reason is inference bounded by incentives, by mechanisms, and by outcome. And here's the line that matters. This is the line I want you to carry forward, okay? Because it will save you from both gullibility and denial from people who demand proof, who say, where's your evidence? Because these people are not operating on the same concept of reason, and reason should be exalted. Where did the American Revolution come from? It came forward during a period in history that has been called the Age of Reason, okay? So you don't need to know to know enough to be concerned. Now, to keep myself honest and to keep you from being dragged into nonsense, I use a test, and it's a reductive test. It's a deliberately limiting test. And tests like this are useful because they clear out all the crap. They clear out all the nonsense. They restrain me as much as it empowers analysis, and this is a good thing. And here it is. A secret combination exists only when three conditions are present. All three, no exception. The first is access, the second is leverage, and the third is institutional insulation. Any one of these is missing, the theory collapses. It not weakens, it collapses. So let's slow this down because this is the whole show. First, access. Not rumor, not association, not they were in the same room once. Access means sustained proximity to targets over time, repeated access, controlled environments, situations where behavior can be observed, influenced, shaped, or compromised. Access answers a simple question. Could this person actually do the thing being alleged? If the answer is no, claim dies right there. Okay, second is leverage. Leverage must be personally destructive, reputationally fatal, or legally compromising. It must be something the target cannot afford to have exposed. This is where people go wrong quite a bit. They think leverage has to be theatrical. It doesn't. It just has to work. Leverage does not need to be used often. It only needs to be creditable. The threat alone alters behavior. Silence is the most common outcome. And third, and this is the one most people ignore, is institutional insulation. Without insulation, access leads to arrest. Without insulation, leverage leads to exposure. Without insulation, the operator, disposable. Get rid of him. Institutional insulation looks boring, and that's why people miss it. It looks like anomalous plea deals. It looks like prosecutions that stall without explanation, like jurisdictional buck passing, like sealed records, like national security invoked where it doesn't belong, like investigators quietly sidelined, careers destroyed for asking the wrong questions. But one thing's for sure, insulation is expensive. It requires coordination, and it is never accidental. Now, let me make this very clear, because this is where sloppy thinking creeps in. This framework does not allege guilt. It does not prove crimes. It does not assign moral blame. It answers a narrower, more important question. Does a secret combination plausibly exist? Because existence and culpability, not the same thing. And at this point, let's take another break. And this is Politics by Jake, and we will be back. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. All right, and this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. Now, going on where we were talking about secret combinations and how they plausibly exist. And I said that existence and culpability are not the same thing. And that before we apply this to any modern example, I wanted to talk briefly, and we're going to now, about why people resist this kind of analysis. Because the resistance itself, that tells us everything. Tells us everything. People resist because they think acknowledging secret combinations means surrendering to fear. They think it means believing everything is rigged, that nothing matters, that agency disappears, and that's wrong. In reality, refusing to analyze secret combinations is what guarantees power remains unaccountable. There's a difference between skepticism and denial. There is a difference between curiosity and credulity. Credulity is someone who will believe anything. Easy to lead. And there's a difference between reason and paralysis. We use reason every day in our personal lives. We don't wait for absolute proof before we stop trusting someone. We don't need a court verdict to decide that a relationship is unsafe. We look at patterns. We look at incentives. We look at behavior. Civic life is no different, except that the stakes are higher. So with that standard in place, let's apply it. Not emotionally, not ideologically, but mechanically. Let's talk about Jeffrey Epstein. There's a lot going on with him in the news. Strip away the mythology. Strip away the internet noise. Strip away the theatrics. Just apply the test. Access? Yes. Sustained, repeated access to political, financial, academic, and cultural elites over the decades. That's not controversial. That's documented. Private jets, private island, controlled environments. Remember that what I said? Private this, private that, controlled this, special access, special that, repeated proximity to that. This is textbook act. Leverage? Now, leverage. Let's talk about this. This is where it gets a little fun. This is where you have to humor me in the academic aspect of me, because you're going to say, "Oh, Jake's going to go. I can hear he's about to go." Okay, but you should listen because this is good. Leverage. This is where the word kompromat matters. Have you heard that word? Kompromat is not mythology. It's not a cult. It's not speculative. It is intelligence tradecraft. And when I'm talking about intelligence, I'm talking about the Office of Strategic Services, which became the CIA. I'm talking about the KGB. I'm talking about MI6. I'm talking about intelligence organizations who practice something called intelligence tradecraft. And like them, Kompromat has a history. It has a logic. You may not like it when I explain it to you, but it has a purpose. Sexual access creates leverage. It always has. People have, in many cases, backwards reactionary attitudes about this. They're fostered in our society. They're fostered in our culture. They're fostered in the many religions that people adhere to in this world. It's pretty much unavoidable. It doesn't matter what you think. It's unavoidable. It's the world we live in. So sexual access creates leverage. Leverage creates silence. Silence creates protection. You do not need demons to explain Epstein. I mean, and all the secret combinations, or I'm sorry, pardon me, All the conspiracies pages, all the Instagram clips and TikTok, they all go back to these very same things: drinking blood, eating babies. The ancient families, the Black Hand, controlling the world. The Rothschilds are always in there somewhere. The show is not about that today. So I'm not going to deny that, and I'm not going to gainsay it, and I'm not going to repudiate it. I'm just saying, you don't need demons to explain Epstein. You don't need that. You don't need the blood rituals. You don't need the eating of babies. You don't need the sexual proclivities and activities with minor girls or minor boys. You don't need cosmic evil as such. You just need incentive. I mean, sexual kompromat is effective because it's visceral, it's stigmatizing, it's often illegal, as I said, and it's devastating if exposed. It doesn't need to be used often. The mere possibility is enough to alter behavior. Now, ask the third question. Institutional insulation. Look at the outcome. Non-standard plea deal. That's Jeffrey Epstein. It's a kind of a plea deal that, like, basically no one would get. Prosecution that barely resembles justice. Kangaroo court. Show trial. Years of protection despite repeated warnings. Names that never get charged. Investigators discouraged or removed. Those are outcomes. And outcomes matter more than intention. If you put that all together, the three that I mentioned: number one, access; number two, leverage; and number three, institutional insulation. That's a narrow, ugly, functional secret combination. You don't need anything else. Not global, not omnipotent, not mystical, not ancient genealogies or heritages, ancient families controlling the world, the Rothschild family with its wealth of $500 trillion, which, by the way, I think the total wealth of the world, it's like maybe 100 trillion. So, but I'm pointing these things out, and I make it particular to point these things out because they're kind of out there, and don't get led in and taken in by them. And that's why I'm approaching it from this point of view. You don't need those. It's not global. It's not any of those things. It's just effective. Okay? Now let me pause here, because this is where people start getting uncomfortable. And that discomfort is informative. People want to jump immediately to names. They want guilt. They want villains. They want closure. That's understandable. But it's also how you lose discipline. And the point here is not who is guilty. The point is why silence persists. Because the phrase is secret combinations, right? Silence is not mysterious when incentives align. Silence is rational. It's rational. And this is where we transition into the second part of the show, because now that the framework is in place, we can examine why certain explanations strengthen the model and why others destroy it. But before we do that, remember this, will you please? When access exists, when leverage exists, and when institutions bend to protect someone, you are allowed. No, more. You are obligated to notice. That's not conspiracy. That's reason. And this is Politics by Jake, and we'll be back with the second part of this after these messages. All right, this is Politics by Jake, and we're back. And now that the framework is on the table, the access, the leverage, the institutional insulation aspects of secret combinations, we can move to the part of this discussion where most people either lose discipline or retreat into fear. And we hope that you, my listeners and viewers, will not do that. Because once you accept that secret combinations exist, the next question is inevitable. How do they actually function over time? And the answer is not spectacle. It's not ritual theater. It's not omnipotence. It's silence management. This is where the concept of kompromat, and it is a hell of a thing, as I said earlier in the show, that we're using this word because it is absolutely a Russian word. You can't say, well, this is Czechoslovakian, or this is Norwegian, or this is from the island of Fiji, or the Philippines, just whatever. It's a Russian word, which means needs to be handled carefully because it is both real and easily abused as an explanation. The word kompromat is short for the Russian kompromittiruющий material. Literal meaning is compromising material. It's information, true, exaggerated, fabricated, and it's used to blackmail. It's used to discredit, to control, to manipulate. Usually political, often sexual, sometimes financial, always leverage, though. And like I said, this is unfortunate. I'm sorry to say this. The Russian people are a great people. They unfortunately have been afflicted for a long time with bad government. This is what caused Rousseau to have attributed to him, and I hasten to cloud my own statement of attribution because I'm not sure, but for a long time, this was said, that it was said by him that the Russian people are slaves and that and people get the government that they deserve, thereby meaning that the Russians were no better than to have a government that was fit only for slaves. Rousseau is supposed to have said this, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, famous for The Age of Reason, but the attribution is murky. I should really look that up. But it's unfortunate because it's a peculiar, distinctly Russian word. Term comes out of Soviet intelligence culture, KGB era specifically, but the tactic predates the USSR. The Tsarist secret police used it before communism. The Bolsheviks perfected it. Bolsheviks were communists. Modern Russian intelligence systematized it. It's still Russian, though. The method is simple. Number one, gather dirt. Number two, create dirt, if necessary, if there's no organic dirt. Number three, just hold it quietly. And number four, use it when needed. And it's not about public scandal right away. It's about pressure, silent pressure. The way it works in practice is like hidden recordings, financial entanglements, illicit relationships, corrupt deals, manufactured photos, deep fakes today with, AI. Sometimes the target themselves don't even know that it exists. Sometimes they know, and if they do, that's actually worse, or, better, depending on which side of it you're coming from. Kompromat isn't just gossip, though. It's weaponized vulnerability. It turns a person into an asset without their consent. And once someone is compromised, they don't need to be convinced. They need to be reminded. That's it. Just reminded. Kompromat is not a theory. It's a technique. And again, it refers to compromising material, financial, sexual, legal, reputational, used to influence behavior. Does not require ideology. Does not require loyalty. It does not even require agreement. It requires only that the target believes that exposure would be catastrophic. That's it. And here's the part that people misunderstand. Kompromat is rarely deployed loudly. It is rarely used as a threat. It is almost never waved around. Its power lies in anticipation. If you know that something exists, if you know it could surface, you do not need to be reminded. You self-regulate. You stay silent. You decline to push. You decide certain battles are not worth fighting. That is why Kompromat produces silence far more than scandal. Now, when we talk about Epstein and the repeated references to Russia, we have to be very disciplined because this is where people either overcorrect or fall into caricature. I'm not saying Russia controls everything. I'm not saying foreign boogeyman. I'm not saying that references equal culpability. What I am saying is this. When a known intelligence technique appears repeatedly in a context that already involves access, leverage, and insulation. Remember the three sine qua nons of a secret combination? Access, leverage, and insulation. That is not decorative. It is not incidental. It supports the mechanism. Russian intelligence culture dating back to the Soviet period has an institutional comfort with Kompromat as a tool. That history is documented. That does not make it magical, and it does not make it omnipresent. It does, however, make it familiar. And familiarity matters in operational context. But notice what I am not doing here. I am not replacing evidence with geopolitics. I am not asserting control where I cannot prove it. I am not inflating the model beyond which it can carry. And apply this to yourselves, will you? Discipline matters more than drama. And what I am further saying is that this is where you have to live with this stuff. Because ultimate facts, you're not going to have them. They're not going to be available to you. You have to have another concept, another paradigm. And if you don't know this, people who say this, and they will skunk you every time. And you won't know how to answer them. They'll say, show me your proof, show me your evidence. And if you don't know this, if you can't make an appeal to reason, they've beaten you. And this is one of the reasons why we're talking about this also. So you can be better armed and do battle. Now, let's talk about silence, because silence is the tell. One of the most common objections you'll hear is this. If this is all true, why doesn't somebody just talk? That question misunderstands incentives. People imagine disclosure as a binary. Either you talk or you don't. In reality, disclosure is weighed against risk. Risk to liberty, risk to safety, risk to family, risk to legacy, and risk to survival. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Protective custody is not always perceived as protection. If you believe the system itself is compromised or even indifferent, then the promise of protection carries little weight, especially when you have reason to believe that silence has preserved your life thus far. Silence, in that context, is not cowardice. It is strategy. This is why we see so many partial disclosures, why information leaks sideways instead of upwards, why stories emerge in fragments, years apart, without resolution. And this is not accidental. This is what incentive alignment looks like. Now, let's contrast this with what does not survive scrutiny, okay? The charts, the bloodlines, the ancient symbols, the talk of hidden priesthoods, ritual governance. These explanations feel satisfying because they're total. They explain everything. Oh, it's a secret government. It's the 13 ancient families and the Black Hand and Rothschilds. They transform complexity into narrative, you see. They replace uncertainty with certainty, but that's exactly why they fail. Total explanations are almost always wrong. Power does not need to be total to be effective. It only needs to control choke points. And here's the key insight most of these charts miss. Real secret combinations do not want to be believed. They want to be ignored. Fear-based mythologies attract attention. They provoke ridicule. They collapse credibility. And in doing so, they protect the actual mechanisms at work. I mean, look, and you have this on Instagram, you have it on TikTok. If someone is spending their time talking about demons and ancient gods and ancient bloodlines, they are not talking about prosecutors, plea deals, jurisdiction, or regulatory capture, and that's not accidental. Here's a rule, okay, that will save you a lot of time. If an explanation requires omnipotence, it's wrong. If an explanation requires ritual evil to perform and to function, it is weak. If an explanation collapses once you remove symbolism, it was never real. Power prefers boring explanations because boring explanations are harder to mobilize against. Now, let's talk about institutional insulation again, please, because this is where everything converges. Institutional insulation, not a conspiracy in the colloquial sense. It is a pattern of behavior across systems that are supposed to act independently, but don't. Prosecutors decline, agencies defer, jurisdictions conflict, records seal, oversight stalls. No single actor has to control everything. They only have to control enough to prevent accountability. This is why waiting for a single smoking gun is a mistake. Secret combinations rarely leave one. Instead, they leave negative space, cases that don't proceed, questions that don't get answers, careers that quietly end. Absence becomes evidence not of guilt but of risk, and this brings us back to the distinction that matters most. Proof governs punishment. Reason governs conduct. You are allowed to adjust your trust based on a reason. You are allowed to withdraw deference. You are allowed to demand transparency. You are allowed to say something here does not add up without claiming certainty. You have to do this. This is where reason lives. And Plato said it, not logic and certainly not opinion, is the highest form of human thought. Refusing to do that, that's not skepticism. It is submission. Refusing to use reason, that is. Now, let me address something directly, because I know some of you are thinking it. Does acknowledging secret combinations mean nothing matters? Does it mean elections don't matter? Does it mean agency disappears? No. It means you stop being naive about where power actually sits. It means you stop confusing symbolism with control. It means you stop waiting for perfect certainty before acting like an adult. Secret combinations do not run the world. They exploit the weaknesses in it. They are not invincible. They are not eternal. They persist because they are misunderstood. And misunderstanding, as I said before, it's like their greatest ally. So let me summarize the framework one last time, cleanly and without embellishment. A secret combination exists when there is access to targets, when there is leverage that can alter behavior, and when there is institutional insulation that prevents consequences. When all three align, silence follows, not forever, not perfectly, but long enough to matter. This framework does not tell you what to believe. It tells you what to look for. And if it's something it does something else that matters. It keeps you from falling into fear, because fear is paralyzing. Reason is empowering. You do not need to know everything. You do not need ultimate facts. You do not need history's final verdict. You need mechanisms. You need incentives. You need outcomes. And when you see the same outcomes repeated across time, across institutions, across administrations, you are allowed to include that coordination exists, even if you cannot name every participant. That is not conspiracy. That is civic adulthood. Secret combinations do not announce themselves. They do not seek your belief. They survive on silence and on confusion. And the first step towards breaking silence is not outrage. It's clarity. And that's our show. We'll see you next week. I'm Jake, and this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. Now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Hi, this is Jake with Politics by Jake. Do you like what you hear right now? Support the real talk then. Go to patreon.com/politics by Jake right now. Every dollar helps fight the noise.